A nation's strength isn't really tested by a single crisis, but when several hit all at once. And right now, the US is facing what you could call a perfect storm. At home, you've got a city in turmoil over a fatal encounter that has just set off a firestorm of protest. And at the exact same time abroad, a standoff that's been simmering for decades is threatening to boil over into actual war. So how does a government handle a storm coming from two fronts?
And right at the heart of this crisis at home, it's a deeply personal tragedy. Those are the words of Heather Zielinski grieving her friend, Alex Priddy. And that loss has become the spark that's ignited a firestorm in Minneapolis and really across the country.
So let's start there, with the crisis at home in Minneapolis. A federal operation has kicked off a chain of events that has put the city on edge and the entire nation on notice.
So who was Alex Priddy? Well, he was a 37-year-old ICU nurse. His father said he was incredibly upset by the ICE operations happening in his city, and then, one day, he found himself in a fatal confrontation with a U.S. Border Patrol agent. This made him the second person killed by federal agents in Minneapolis just this month. And this is really where the two stories just completely diverge. The administration's official line is that Priddy was, and I'm quoting, responsible for his own death. But his friends, they tell a completely different story. They say he died a hero, trying to help someone in need. You've got two narratives, two completely different realities, and an entire city caught right in the middle.
And this is a huge development. The president has just announced he's sending his so-called border czar, Tom Homan, to take over operations on the ground. This is a big deal, and it signals a major shift. Sources inside the administration are even suggesting it's because the White House is starting to realize that the situation in Minneapolis is turning into a PR disaster for them.
But this is not just playing out in the streets. Oh no, Minnesota is now fighting back in the courts. They're actually suing to stop the entire federal operation, calling it an infringement on their sovereignty. That is a bold move. And they've also taken the pretty extraordinary step of getting a court order to preserve all evidence from the shooting, which is a really clear sign of just how deep the mistrust is between local and federal authorities right now.
So while all this is happening in Minneapolis, another storm is gathering on the other side of the world. It's a storm that's been brewing for decades, and now it's threatening to erupt into a full-blown conflict. We're talking, of course, about Iran.
Just look at this number, 3,919. That is the estimated number of protesters killed in Iran's crackdown, according to the human rights activists' news agency. It's a staggering figure. It's hard to even wrap your head around, but it gives you a sense of the sheer scale of the violence the regime has unleashed on its own people.
Now, these protests, they started over economic issues, the price of goods, things like that. But as these maps from the Institute for the Study of War show, they just exploded and spread like wildfire across the entire country. The regime's response? It was brutal. And it was fast. A near total internet shutdown to try and hide what they were doing from the rest of the world.
In this timeline, it shows you just how unbelievably fast things escalated. I mean, think about it. In less than 3 weeks, we went from protests in the streets of Iran to a full U.S. carrier strike group sitting in the Persian Gulf. It is a chillingly rapid slide towards a potential war.
And let me be clear, this is not just political posturing. Reports are coming out that the White House is finalizing what they call a target bank. We're talking about a literal list of potential strikes on sensitive facilities and influential figures, reportedly including the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei himself.
So let's just take a step back for a second. You have these two massive, high-stakes crises unfolding at the exact same time. It's putting the White House under an almost unprecedented level of pressure. And when you look at it side by side like this, you can really see the parallel pressures. At home, it's a crisis of trust. Abroad, it's a crisis of brinksmanship, the threat of war. And what's really interesting is how similar the administration's response is in both cases, a big show of force. It's a high-stakes gamble, and they're playing it on two fronts at once.
And all this pressure? Well, it is causing some serious cracks to show inside the administration itself. Just listen to this quote from an anonymous and clearly furious Homeland Security official. They're talking about the public statements on the Minneapolis shooting. This just shows you how deep the internal dissent is getting.
And this is so important, because the frustration here, it's not just about office politics, right? It's about this fundamental gap between the official story they're being told to push and the reality that they're seeing on the ground, especially with video evidence. And that disconnect is causing deep frustration and a real fear of long-term damage to the very institutions they're supposed to protect the country.
So, where does all of this leave us? Well, in both Minneapolis and Iran,
We're basically left in this really tense, really unsettled situation with absolutely no clear resolution in sight.
Abroad, the picture is incredibly murky. Iran's government is out there saying calm has been restored, but human rights groups are telling a totally different story. Thousands killed, tens of thousands detained, and arrests are apparently still going on. It's just really hard to know what's actually happening on the ground.
And what about Minneapolis? Yeah, a new czar is on the ground, but the fundamental question hasn't changed. Is this a real attempt to rebuild trust, or is it just changing the face on the same iron-fisted approach? The answer to that is going to determine whether this city heals, or if it continues to burn.
Meanwhile, that U.S. armada is in place. The president says the situation is in flux. All the pieces are on the board, and the entire world is basically holding its breath, just waiting to see if the next move is a step towards diplomacy or a step right into open conflict.
It really leaves us with a critical question. When trust in your own government is frayed and worn thin at home, and the peace abroad is this fragile, how does a nation, how does any leader, successfully navigate a perfect storm?